surprisingly accurate.
Oh, yeah.
And surprisingly complimentary, because I've been getting the shit kicked out of me recently in the Australian newspaper. So if she did it again today, it might not be so complimentary. But
I'm Matt Cooper, and this is Bite Sides.
Welcome to the latest edition of Ozfine Bite Sides podcast. Today is a pretty amazing day because we've got the best dressed guest of all time sitting in front of me. You've definitely raised the bar, David, as you walked into the podcast studio. But thank you very much for joining us today. Our special guest is Mr. David Williams, Managing Director of Kidder Williams. David, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you on board, and again, commending you on your dress sense. You've definitely raised the bar, but mate, it is fantastic to have you on board. Your story is really, really unique in what you've been able to achieve through your career. And on that note, I'd love maybe if you could just give us a quick synopsis of your journey of Kidder Williams and the different areas that you've advised on over your journey.
Yeah, so people think because we're sort of number one in the country advising corporations on food, ag and beverages that I've come off a farm. Well, it was the last place I came from. My father was from Glasgow, came out here after the war when his brother was killed in the war and got a job driving trams. That's as close as I got to a farm. I actually happen to own a couple now, but that's the longest story. But
Which city did he immigrate to?
To Melbourne.
To Melbourne, okay.
Yeah. And quickly moved us out of Armidale, which, of a house that he thought was the slums because it reminded him of Glasgow, and bought a brand new brick veneer house in Ferntree Gully. And I think he paid $35,000 for it. It's probably still worth $35,000, but the house we moved out of is now worth $3 million. Anyway, he still can't get that, but that's a longer story. So, we're probably number one in the country advising corporations on buying and selling companies. So it could be I'm acting for Coca-Cola to sell SBC. It could be I'm acting for Bega to buy Vegemite. It could be I'm acting for Cadbury to buy a biscuit business, all of which we've done in the last year or so. And so how do we get to that? We got to that because I was an academic for 10 years. I was teaching finance at the University of Sydney, and my PhD was on co-operatives, agricultural cooperatives.
Interesting.
And how you structure their capital and so forth. Because there's a lot of people who criticise co-ops for not having enough capital and blah, blah, blah. I won't bore you with all that talk at the moment, but that was my PhD. So when I went into investment banking, my first job was to work on the merger between SPC and Ardmona, both Canners in Victoria, as you know. And interestingly, that was back in 1984. Well, I kept working on it, to be honest, until about last year when I sold it for Coke because they'd bought it for $1 billion and then it wasn't working, so I got rid of it. But I worked on the merger, I then worked on the float of SBC and then a sale of SBC. I often joke to people it's like a sexually transmitted disease. It just kept coming back.
Just keeps coming back.
But it was a beautiful thing. And so that was an interesting thing because even though I was an expert on co-ops, that led me into co-ops in food. And that's fine. And so there's hardly a co-op in the country that I haven't worked for unless I've got a conflict. So I worked for Bega. It was a co-op which we turned into a public company. So that meant I couldn't work for Bond Lake, for example, or Murray Goulburn. But I can work for, say, Buller, which I do, because Bega doesn't do ice cream. So there's no conflict there. But unless I've had a conflict, I've worked for co-ops everywhere, and you'll be shocked how many co-ops there are in the country than what they do. Ginger, navy beans for tobacco, just name anything. And the reason for that, which sort of leads me closer to food, is that in this country from about the 30s and 40s, we had all these statutory authorities that were set up to help farmers to aggregate product. So I'm talking about the wheat board, the wool board, the barley board, etc. And you won't know it down in Victoria because it was only about 4 boards, but in Queensland there was the navy bean board and the ginger board, and there was 20 of them, And these were set up so that farmers in the early days of the century weren't going to get screwed over by the big international traders, grain traders and so
bloody
on.
traders.
So pull them all together, yeah. And then that body can sell the wheat. or the bull
Sure.
or whatever it happened to be.
Yeah.
So the interesting thing was that Kerrin, who was the Minister for Ag at the time in 1989 in Canberra, decided that they'd get rid of all these statutory authorities. So he had a meeting in Hobart, all the ag ministers from around the country. And he said, right, I'm going to get rid of them all. And if you don't get rid of them within a year or two, I'm going to withhold what they call competition payments. This was a big issue at the time where they were making competition payments to the states in order to get them to privatise these things. So he sent them back to their home states. I got a call from one of the grain bodies in Queensland. There was 4. There was like the barley board, the sorghum board, the wheat board, and bulk grains Queensland was all the port infrastructures and upmarket rail structures and so forth. And they said, look, this thing's going to be privatised. Could you come and act for us? So I went to them, and I then went. Cut a long story short, but I went to the cabinet of the Queensland government. This is when Bellamy Peters was premier, by the way.
Yeah.
And I said to him, look, you guys can't sell this. This is not your asset to sell. It might be a statutory authority, but it's not your asset to sell. And the reason is because you've been taking payments, withholding payments to farmers in order to buy new ports and silos and blah, blah, blah. These are really farmer assets. And I think that you should give them back to the farmers. Now, this is interesting because I put the 4 boards together and I was representing 4 of them, and they had 300 million cash in the bank, just to show you what the big deal is, and probably about $5 billion worth of port assets and so on and so forth. So I'm in front of the cabinet and I said, well, this is the way I look at it. And they said, believe it or not, they said, okay, we like that, but we're not going to give them to the farmers because we don't want to wake up tomorrow and find that John Elliott now owns them. John at the time was still running Elders. So I said, well, I've got an idea for you. Why don't we turn it into a co-op? And you give the assets to the co-op, and then it'll be owned by all the farmers. So it's not going to be taken over as if you were selling it, They said, oh, we love that idea. So that's what happened. And the farmers got this. It turned it into the biggest co-op in Queensland. And then I thought, shit, I'm onto a winner here. This is not a bad product. So I went and did the peanut board. I went and did the ginger board. I went and did the navy bean board. I went and did
Took the business
tobacco
model
board.
and ran with it.
And then I just worked my way down the coast, and around the coast to Perth, and did the milk board over there and blah blah blah. So that's interesting because what happened then? So that got me into privatisation. This is a very interesting story because I just privatised, say, all the ports and so forth for the grain industry, and Kennett then said, I'm going to privatise electricity in this state. And so there was a group came from Louisiana to buy City Power, which is the electricity distribution business where we're sort of more or less sitting now. And it was a couple of $1 billion. And they wanted to pitch to who they would have as an advisor. So I was one of 5. They came to see me, and I was dealing with Kennett at the time just by coincidence. And so I said, well, look, do you want to meet the Premier? And they said, oh, this is 3 guys from Louisiana. And they go, oh, do you know him? I go, oh, I fucking know him. So I picked up the phone. I rang up Kennett. And just by coincidence, he was in his office. So he says, come up, bring him up here now. So we just got on the tram, went up the end of Collins Street. Jeffrey opens the door and he goes, Dave, my old mate,
You got the job.
Yeah, and that was on the back of the fact. I was saying I was an expert in infrastructure. And because I'd done a couple of ports with grain on it, and suddenly I'm acting for these guys to buy electricity, which I did buy, $1.9 billion. So anyway, so the point is that these co-ops turn themselves, these statutory authorities turn themselves into co-ops.
Yep.
And then a lot of those co-ops then listed on the stock exchange. So the egg cooperative in Victoria, just here, close to you now, where we're sitting, turned itself into the egg co-op. So that was the egg statutory authority, turned itself into the egg co-op. Then it turned itself into the listed company, Farm Pride Foods.
Yep.
And that's happened to Budrum Ginger and a whole lot of the grain ones and so forth. So it's that led me into food companies. So I started off as an expert on co-ops. Then I, through that, became an expert on infrastructure. And through that, suddenly I'm dealing with all the food companies. And then it sort of just took off from there. So now I act for a lot of the big ones like Cadbury and Mondelez and Bega and Coke and so forth.
Just on the, can we just take a quick side street? Just through your study of co-ops, and obviously you've mentioned, which I wasn't aware, that how wide-ranging the cooperative model is in the country and remains. But obviously we had a lot of cooperatives in the dairy sector for a long time, dominated.
Yeah.
They've now all gone, predominantly gone. We've got Norco in New South Wales. I think that's the only one left.
Yeah.
In your opinion, was there a difference in the way that the cooperatives worked in the dairy sector over other cooperatives, or I just note that there's largely none remaining. So just to comment your thoughts on why they haven't worked in the dairy industry.
Well, I don't think they're any different in dairy than they were in meat, where there's very few co-ops now as well. By the way, when you look at co-ops and go, well, there's not many left, I've probably started more co-ops than I've privatised. And so what you see is they sort of go in cycles.
Sure.
And if the co-op gets too big, you get a lot of disenfranchised farmers who go, this is not looking after me anymore.
Yeah.
So why don't we set up another co-op? So I'll give you an example. I was working for the Australian Wheat Board.
Yep.
Right? It's all wheat. But under that Wheat Board umbrella is peas and, canola and blah, blah, blah. And so over the years, there's been groups that have spin out of the AWB and go, well, I'm a pea farmer. Why don't we set up a little co-op that just does peas in northern Victoria or pulses or whatever it happens to be? So I don't think it doesn't happen. And even in dairy, you'll see lots of little things happening all the time where people are spinning out of, bigger organisations and sometimes into co-ops. So, but I don't think Bega still could have been a co-op. I mean, there's a fallacy, in my opinion, that co-ops just don't have enough capital. I think they always have enough capital. It's just that they get romanced sometimes by people like me who come from Collins Street, go, this is an inefficient organisational structure, do it a different way. No, if I go and raise capital to put it into a co-op, to make it a company, I've still got to pay those people a return. So if I go and raise money in Collins Street, put it into a corporatised Bega cheese, for example, the people in Collins Street want me to pay them 12%. So who's paying that? The farmers are paying it. So what I say is, if you're going to pay it, you might as well take the debt yourself and put it in the co-op. And what's more, they can be more efficient. So it's very interesting because when I was doing my PhD, I looked at all sorts of co-ops from very, very small right up to very, very large. And when they're very, very large, they're very inefficient because nobody's overseeing them. They become a law unto themselves. But if I took you back to really tight-knit co-ops, like let's say it's a church-based one or a really small regional town, you might only have 100 people, 200 people, right? What happens when you look at those co-ops? They've got lower expenses than everybody else. They don't have any bad debts. The managing director gets paid a lot less than what they do in the big co-ops because So if I took you to the police credit co-op, for example, the guy who's running it's getting paid the same as the chief commissioner or something. He's not getting paid the same as somebody in BHP. So it's very interesting and when those people do their annual reports, they put in the report, for example, people who have bad debts. Well, if you're in a very small community, everybody's looking over your shoulder. And the last thing they want to see is you bastard, you owe us money. You owe us money, and so it doesn't happen. So you get these smaller co-ops that have no bad debts, really efficient and very focused because everybody's looking over each other's shoulder. But when you get it too big, it's not usually it's not just one product anymore. It's not just milk. It'll be 15 different dairy products.
Yeah.
So
That's really interesting, and certainly the case from an outside observer. Obviously, we're not a processor in the dairy industry, although still involved in the industry, but not as a processor. But from an outside looking in, that it's certainly what looked to happen in the dairy industry. Yeah.
I should say just one thing before we go off that, though, that you've got to be careful also when you look at dairy because of deregulation.
Yep.
And so deregulation has changed the industry completely in terms of what's sustainable and what's not sustainable on a geographic basis. Right, so you can still grow a bit of milk in, say, Brisbane because you can get a really high price for it, but it's not the most efficient place. And if you look at what's happened since deregulation, the dairy industry's just been moving further and further south. And you can tell by that movement what's happening because co-ops go out of business and the market milk's coming from somewhere else in the country and so forth. But you don't have to be blind Freddy to know that in 10 years' time, probably 70% of the industry is going to be in Tasmania, where it's still growing, but it's not growing in most other places in the country because it's too inefficient, too hot, not enough water, or there's a whole lot of reasons.
No, that's essentially the question I was going to ask. From your perspective, coming from lots of different industries and ag industries, your take on the current state of the Australian dairy industry. Obviously, you've spoken about the progression south, environmentally driven most of it, but just in general, obviously we're going backwards on milk from where we were, obviously at the peak of when we're still a regulated industry, around 12 billion litres of milk.
Yeah.
Now steady state for around 9.3 for quite a long time. Now we're at mid-eights. And further declines. Just your general take on current state and where you think we're going to end up.
Well, I think the industry, I'm very optimistic, and because I'm in ag, the ups and downs of agriculture don't affect me so much. I mean, I look through that. Unfortunately, in all sorts of ag, if the season's good, what do people do? Put on more animals or plant more crops or whatever it happens to be, and then there's a glut. So next thing they're pulling them out or cutting their heads off or whatever. So I look through that because it's a long-term thing. Although if I'm advising companies, I'm looking for ways to even that out. And that might be one of 100 different things to do, both in dairy or maybe adding products to the dairy thing. So it could be dairy products that are just waste, but now you can turn it into muscle building milk powders or something like that. Or it could be buying other businesses at tack on the side, which takes the volatility out. So, for example, when Bega Cheese bought Vegemite earnings are like that. I mean, they're like that, but it's growing by population. So there's 25 million people in this country. Vegemite makes 25 million jars. Okay, everybody's got it in their fridge or their cupboard. I don't care. Even if you're an Indian taxi driver, you got it because your kids are getting it at school. So the earnings are flat. Well, not so much flat, but they're going up by population. But they're not volatile. And so you can have a Bega where your return on milk might be going like that, but your return on Vegemite's like that, you know. And so sometimes there's a lot to be done on the waste side. Yeah, and I mean, I'll give you an example. We were making a takeover bid for Warrnambool Cheese and Butter. And we're up against, there's three bidders. There's us, there's Saputo from Canada, and there's Mad Gary from Murray Goulburn, right? The three of us are bidding
Mad
for
Gary.
it. Yeah. And so we're bidding for the bloody thing. And the big cheese manufacturing plant down there, very complicated because it was actually part of it was a plant inside the plant of Warrnambool Cheese and Brother. Anyway, we won't go there. So when you're making cheese, you get this whey, right? And so the Warrnambool Cheese and Butter had a license from the Mines Department of Victoria from, and I forget the date, but it's roughly 1954 or something, okay? And the license is take the waste, the water, the whey, and just spray it on all the paddocks around the factory.
Sure.
Great. Yeah. Why not? It's just natural. Who gives a shit? And so they had that, and that's what they were doing. So when you were doing the due diligence on it, people discovered that the whey around the Warrnambool Cheese and Butter factory, there's a lot of sandstone with cracks and fissures and so forth. The whey is going into the cracks and it's coming out 10 kilometres into the sea, right? And the whales are feeding on it. People thought whales were going there to breed. They were just going there to have a milkshake. That's what was happening, you know. And so amazing. And so, but wait till you hear this. This is the interesting, and this goes right across the meat industry in particular, but dairy as well. If I took you back 20 years, the stuff that was just put down the drain, people have had to, you know, do something about it. And, you know, when that happens, people go, oh, this is bad, you know, regulation, blah, 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 blah. But nearly in every case, those products have turned themselves into very valuable enhanced products. And I don't care whether you're talking about whey in dairy or you're talking about blood in an abattoir or a gallstone in an abattoir or something. Some of the prices are amazing. It just forces people. So you take that whey that was going onto a paddock, that can go now into, well, all sorts of powders that go into gyms and muscle building and all that. Infant formula and so forth. So, you know, I love this whole thing about waste, you know, and I say to people, in every food industry, there's waste. When you turn on that machine in the morning, I don't care what you're making, it's not always right. So there's waste comes off at the start, And then when you turn it off at night, there's usually a lot of waste that comes off at the end. And one of the great growth areas for me in every industry is how do you better use that waste, and not just go to landfill. So I'll give you an even better example. I bought Tassal, a salmon company down in Tasmania, the biggest aquaculture company in the business, in the country, and I was doing 4,000 or 5,000 tonnes of salmon a year. So get the salmon out of the water, cut the slices off it, and then the frames and the heads, so the skeleton and the heads, I had to pay somebody, $100 a tonne or something to take him to landfill. Now Tassal's doing 40,000 tonnes. Well, I don't need to pay him anymore because what I set up was a tallow plant, like you'd do in an abattoir to get your fats and that off it. Okay, you scrunch it all up, you really hit it with heat, you take all the oil off it, so the oil goes into a vitamin C tablet, and then you take the other stuff and that goes into cat food or dog food or something like that, and lots of other things. So now here was something that's cost me a shitload of money to get somebody to take it away and put it into landfill. It's now got half a dozen products that come on it. And some of those products are going into cosmetics, some of them into supplements like vitamin C and so forth. But that is one of the most exciting things, I think, is taking waste.
Really interesting story, and particularly us being, dairy focused. Obviously, we know the waste story where it used to be a waste product, but now incredibly valuable, particularly if you concentrate it up into WPC and WPI. But the story, as you say, be industry wide. Every industry will have a similar story, where the values extracted out of what was once a waste product.
100%.
Yeah, interesting.
100%. But I think it also in dairy, as with anything else that's in the supermarkets, things have got tighter and tighter because of the supermarket concentration, number one, but more particularly because the supermarkets are trying to get them down to 2 brands. So they're saying, look, I had 6 brands, but I only want 2.
And one of them I want to be ours.
Well, no, and then I'll have a fighting brand and mine or something. So you could have 4. But you look at some categories. If I took you to, for example, to sardines, there's 18 different brands. Well, it's unsustainable. And so, every time, the supermarkets take a Paddy's Pies off the thing or something, they're just rationalising. So that's something that, has led, food companies obviously to spend a lot of more time talking about marketing and a lot more time trying to salvage your position at number 1 or number 2 and not be, number 3, which before they throw you out, they're going to put you right on down the bottom of the shelf anyway. So people don't want to. They can't even get down there. They don't look down there and they can't see the price.
Interesting. Just take a sidestep to your own business. So Kidder Williams, I know you spend a lot of time and energy in other people's businesses and with your eyes up, looking on the horizon, looking for opportunities that are out there. Your own business. Just curious to know your experience of growing and scaling to a point, Kidder Williams. Did you enter that business with a strategic plan for that business, or was it more, I'm just going to go where the opportunity is and an organic growth?
Just organic growth, really. I mean, I look at my business as, I'm an old man, so I'm just having fun. That's what I'm doing. But because we're a food and ag, we've got at any one time in the year, every year, we would have today 12 jobs on the go. And because it's food and ag, it's everywhere.
Yep.
So I'm on the Tiwi Islands, which is 60k north of Darwin.
Yeah, sure.
I'm selling an abattoir in Darwin for Aussie Ag, which is based in Brisbane. I'm selling Bundaberg sugar in Bundaberg on behalf of a Belgian private family that owns it for 700 million. I'm doing some other work in Bundaberg, which I won't talk to you about, but I'm selling Fremantle octopus in Fremantle. I'm all over the place. And so you spend a lot of time on planes and hotels and shitty hotels, by the way, because you're doing motels where they knock on the door in the morning and you've got a little hole in the wall. They put your breakfast in and close it up again. Anyway, that's by the by, but it's very exciting. So and I'll be down in. So I can be in Tiwi today, Hobart tomorrow, Fremantle the next day. Trying to get my guys to do a lot more of this. So, but we just have a bit of fun.
So you get energy from that. You enjoy the travel and the
it's
different.
Fantastic. If you just spent a couple of days with me, you would wet your pants, honestly, because it's so interesting to see how people make money.
Yeah,
and just aggregation's interesting enough. Like if I told you, we're selling Fremantle octopus, right? Okay, so what? Okay, but if I took you out and showed you what they've done in the last 5 years in terms of technology, they can catch 10 times as much in half the time.
Yep.
Because of the way in which the technology goes, and do it much more efficiently from the point of view of sustaining wild fisheries. In other words, we're not going along the bottom with a rake, getting every bloody thing up and keeping one species and throwing everything back dead. So every industry is very interesting. I think just in terms of how they're growing. And the other thing that I find interesting is that those growth things are at all sorts of different levels, right? So it could be just tech. Okay, I'm going to catch octopus in a different way. Or it could be tech in the terms of what I'm going to do with blood coming off an abattoir or something like that, But in addition to that, there's these huge shifts that fortunately I'm privy to where I'm sitting in my helicopter watching it. So one of them, for example, is, which will be interesting to your meat people and also the dairy people, is that people at the bigger end of town, I'm talking about the big meat companies of the world and the big dairy companies of the world, are not seeing themselves anymore as just meat or dairy.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So let's take JBS. I sold them 7 different abattoirs in Australia, from Yarrawonga down to King Island. They're the biggest beef company in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the abattoirs I sold them was here at Brooklyn in Melbourne, which does about 6,000 sheep a day or something. That's the first time they ever went into sheep. So they saw themselves as being the biggest beef company in the world. Suddenly they're in what they call smalls, sheep. And how that came about is a longer story, but interesting. But within 2 years or 3 years of me selling them that, they bought a massive chicken place in North America. They've just bought Huon in Tasmania. And so you say, so what the hell is going on there? And what's going on is that people are sitting there, everybody else is looking at them saying, you're big in beef. They are. But they're looking at themselves saying, we're big in protein.
Yeah.
Because when somebody goes into the supermarket to buy dinner, they go, what will I have? Will I have salmon? Will I have whiting? Will I have, chicken? And so they look at themselves as being a protein company. And even within their own sort of species, if you like, they're looking at better ways to grow, So how do I get the genetics of that cow to produce more quickly with less inputs and so forth? So interestingly, I'm sitting there I bought Tassal myself 10 years ago or something out of receivership personally for $42.5 million. So I'm sitting there looking at JBS. They made a bid for Huon, and I forget what it was, but let's say $600 million. And so I then said to Cook's, which is the biggest fish company in the world, but based in Canada, on the east coast of Canada, and I said, you should have a crack at this. So we then bid against them. So it's us, JBS out of Brazil, and then Twiggy Forrest thinks he'll, pump up his balls and have a go himself. So he goes and buys
Moving to salmon.
20%. Yeah, he didn't really want salmon. I think he was just trying to do a deal with the Tasmanian Premier. But so he bought 20%. So I actually got a big shit fight on my hands. But let's forget about how that happened and what was the result just for the moment. What I'm doing is I'm looking at JBS, and I know that family that owns the company, and I'm going, fuck, you're in beef, then you're in lamb, now you're in chicken, now you're in salmon. And then they've got a fish distribution business, not dissimilar to yours. So I think they just see themselves as a protein company. So, okay, we missed out to JBS on buying Huon for Cook's. So we turned around and made a takeover bid for Tassal, $1.7 billion, and bought it. Now, it was bought by Cook's. I forget what they turn over, but let's say it's $20 billion US, and they've got fish everywhere around the world. So they've got every sort of species you can think of. And they've got a couple of hundred trucks racing around North America selling fish to restaurants and everybody else. And I'm saying to Glenn Cook, who owns it, listen, mate, you seeing what I'm seeing? Because I've been seeing a long time that these fish companies, like Cook's, are saying, well, we're not just in salmon anymore. We're in all sorts of fish, and all we're really interested in is how do we grow more fish more quickly at a lower price. And it might be that salmon's not the one you want. Maybe red mullet, maybe. And anyway, so I said to him, look what JBS is doing. You're a protein company. That's what you are. But you've just been too myopic, too focused on fish. So why don't we have a crack at a couple of abattoirs in Australia? He goes, let's go. So this is how I generate money, by the way, please. But this is my job.
Yeah, of course.
See, all I am is really a matchmaker.
Yeah.
You know, I can see Bega because I'm acting for them, and then I go, well, what next?
Yeah.
Why not Vegemite?
Yeah.
So how does that make sense? And how do I rationalise it? And how do I sell it to the board and Barry Irvin, who you've just had on? But it's the same with cooks. Yeah, how do I'm a matchmaker. I can run a business matching people because that's all I do. I'm just trying to take characteristics of a company and put it together with some other company. It's no different than people. I mean, I couldn't figure out my own love life, by the way, but that's took me a few years to do that before I got it right. Well, I think I got it right. You never know.
Can I ask a very quick question? And I'm just going to jump in there because it's very pertinent. You're saying you're a matchmaker, and which is very personnel and personality dependent and relationship dependent.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking. You've listed off, you know, the Cook's family and the JBS family, etc., which becomes your relationship with Jeff Kennett. You mentioned earlier, it all becomes very relationship driven and very personal. And at the end of the day, you're talking huge money, but it's very quite often a one-on-one relationship of personality.
It doesn't always start that way. The interesting thing is that, you know, all deals are different, but I'll have somebody come to me I've never met before. And so I've got a little company here. It trades nuts. It's worth 100 mil. Okay, fine. I've never met them. But most deals, when people come to do a deal, I say to them, look, put a circle around 6 months. And it takes 6 months to do most deals. I've done one or two really quick ones in my time, but it rarely happens. So take 4 to 6 months, maybe even longer sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't happen, then you come back a year later. But my point is that because it takes 6 months, and because in many cases, especially the small cases, say under 500 mil, this is the people's primary asset.
Yeah.
And so you become very close to not only the person, but the family.
Yeah.
You know, so Wesley Batista, who runs JBS and who went to jail only a year or two ago for bribery, let's not go there, but he would come out with his wife or, you know, people, you get to know them all, you know, and over 30 years, you know, I mean, I can't go to a restaurant and not be known, but I don't know most of them because I'm not only close to the family, but I've got to be close to the CFO, the chairman, you know, the board, and their wives and kids, and you know, blah blah blah. So that's great. That's a great part of it, but it doesn't always start that way, you know, because it might come to you cold. And but the interpersonal skills are pretty important because. I could say to you, you're sitting on the Bega board, why don't we buy Vegemite? You go, what the fuck are you talking about? We're a dairy company, you know, and you go, okay, well, listen to this. So you got to be able to sell.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good at seeing the linkages. I'm pretty good at selling.
So I guess there is a parallel between what we do as well, right? Like, so you see the opportunity and relationship driven, and at the end of the day, it's built on trust. So if they trust you, you cut through a whole lot of crap essentially, and you get to the point very quickly.
Yeah.
And it was actually the point I was going to ask, I guess, or the question I was going to ask is around AI, and you're hearing about how much that's going to disrupt the world if you believe that, if you believe the rhetoric around it. Yeah. But at the end of the day, your business and our business is very much built on personal relationships.
Yeah.
Do you think that will change over time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the personal relationships will still be important in the foreseeable future. But AI will or should change your business in particular, like now, like not in a year's time, not in 2 years' time. You know, if you and I just got a whiteboard out now, I bet you we could have some new business within 24 hours using AI. Right. But I also bet you that, you know, like I said before, some people get too close to the trees. They can't see the trees for the forest. So I've got an abattoir. I go in, I kill 6,000 lambs a day. Beautiful. I go home, have a beer. That's it. But they can't see out that, you know, this whole notion of becoming a protein company or whatever it is. Now, what I do is I'm trying to look at matchmaking in corporations, but I could apply it to your business. If I came in here for a week, I bet you I could increase the turnover by 5% in a week. And I would do it by relationships that I've already got and maybe you don't have or you've never even thought of. Or I could do it with AI. So let's just take meat, for example. Okay, obviously know the meat industry. I've sold 7 abattoirs to JBS. I'm selling AA & Co's abattoir, all that. I get all that. But when I look at the meat industry, I know who's running Twiggy's meat, for example. I know where they're selling it to in Thailand. I know who would buy that meat on contract in Manila that's not currently buying in Australia because I've been over there recently with the government and so forth. But there's all sorts of things happening in real time in the meat industry that I could also bring in. So I would say the most impressive person, the most important person for the meat industry, in my opinion, at the moment for trading is Matt Toll. Now, Matt Toll runs a business out of Sydney with Jack Cowan. Jack Cowan owns Hungry Jack's.
Yep.
And Matt was running the whole program for McDonald's.
Yep.
And they promised him equity, didn't get equity, so he left. And Jack says, okay, why don't you come into business with me? I've got pizza business, Hungry Jack's, blah, 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 right? So he says, I'll put all the money in, you put in your fat ass, 50-50. And so that was 5-6 years ago. He would be the biggest supplier of meat out of this country now into the US. And he's running the program for Hungry Jack's, McDonald's, et cetera, and now having to take meat from everywhere because the program's so big, So that in the home territory, he knows everybody. He knows every abattoir. I'm like, I think I know a fair few, but he's got a working knowledge of what's happening. Like where's all the trim going this week? Is it going to China or isn't it going to China? And all that sort of stuff. And right now, when you think about what's happened in the meat industry, you're trading meat, so you'll know this, but the guys are making out like bandits. They've never made so much money. Like Tees would have made 400 million profit this year. It probably lost 200 the year before, and it'll make another 400 next year.
Unfortunately, that is the nature of the meat game as well, right? He's very roller coaster.
100%. But, I mean, for example, we have a client in Texas that has a big meat plant, Australian guy, and makes a lot of money, but they only set it up about 3 years ago to export meat. Well, there's no meat exported out of the US, so it's all coming out of Australia. They're the biggest customer for JBS in North America, and they're just bringing in box meat frozen like you'd be selling.
Yep.
He breaks it, and he'll break it for Matt Toll. Matt Toll says, okay, break it, pack it in this way, and send it to these guys who make the hamburgers for McDonald's.
Yep.
So, there's all these opportunities that are there one day, and this is where you should be concentrating because you're a trading company. You don't need to build a business so that meat price is going to stay high for the next 10 years because we know it's not. When the herd comes back in the US, it'll change. So and then there's all these cross-border opportunities as well, which people, often don't have the resources to infiltrate.
Yeah, it's getting back to the AI thing. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, in our world, which is kind of super reliant on personal relationships and trust and et cetera. So it's it'll be interesting. But all those comments you just made around around what's happening out there, particularly in meat world, is super interesting.
But you know what? I didn't touch on AI, which I meant to do, but because everything I was talking about is just like the status quo now, right?
It is,
I can do it by ringing up Matt Toll or something like that. But if I want to employ AI to help me on that, what I can do in half an hour is unbelievable. I can find out would I be interested in as trading meat? Well, first of all, I'd be interested in who's got what licenses. So, we all know how important it is to have a China license, but that's changing rapidly as well in terms of who has and who hasn't got them. But then licenses for other countries and who's got capacity and who hasn't got capacity. It's all of that can be done in half an hour.
Yeah. Whereas,
and you keep asking questions.
Yeah.
And if you're smart, like one of my sons has got a big tech business, but he just has it hooked up in his car, so he's talking to AI as a person, and saying, look, I was just reading about this yesterday. What do you make of it? Answer comes back and they go, well, what about this? And the detail you get is just unbelievable. I got one the other day. This will knock you out socks off. Some woman was coming to see me who's in ag in North Queensland, and she before she arrived, she sent me an email. She said, "Look, I haven't met you before. I've heard a lot about you, but I thought I might as well find out who I'm meeting." So she put me into ChatGPT, and she said, "Tell me everything you know about Dave Williams." I thought, "Fuck this! Jesus Christ! I'm not sure I want to." But it was surprisingly accurate. And surprisingly complimentary, because I've been getting the shit kicked out of me recently in the Australian newspaper. So if she did it again today, it might not be so complimentary. But anyway, so it's fantastic. And I've just got such a fire in my belly about this, and it's really only. I'm glad I'm talking to you about it, because it's really only happened in the last week. My staff are all using it, but I read an article on the weekend about Richard White. I don't know if you know Richard White. He's got this listed company in worth a couple of bill in Perth.
Yep.
He got caught, doing things, and so suddenly he wasn't chairman anymore. They just did their whole investor relations thing on AI. So they said, we want to go and hit all the institutional investors. This is the sort of message we want to see. Their annual report's getting generated by AI. I'm thinking, you know what? It's very hard to go out and find and talk to all investors in all jurisdictions and so forth, just like it's hard if you're a trader.
Yep.
The old days of trading, look, we do a lot of work in trading. It's things like nuts, because we act for Select Harvest and things like that. The guys that I know who are in trading nuts and have been in it for 30 years, they sit at their desk at 8 or 9 o'clock at night when they finish their dinner, put a bottle of whiskey there, and then they just work through the night. But what are they doing? In the old days, what they did was they're just waiting for a hailstorm in the almond crop in California, and then they go, fuck, buy everything, and then sell everything to the Indians. So people were going on. That's how they got their information in those days, and people still do that.
Yeah.
But there's so many smarter ways to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the answer, right? So it's just going to be different, but I think that the simple legwork of information sourcing is going to be much, much easier, but that also erodes competitive advantage to a point, because everyone's going to be able to do it. So you have to be – the point of difference has to be in other areas other than unique information that you have and no one else has.
Yeah. But it just changes.
It does.
See, when I first went into investment banking, we used to have what we called the red books. And the red books were a volume like this, loose leaf, like that. And there would have been 50 or 60 of them. And in those red books was every listed company in Australia. And so every day when a company puts out a release to the ASX, they would send you the very next morning at 8 o'clock a pack like this of all the releases that were done. And when you pulled the first one up, it said, take out page 27 from volume 50 and put these pages in and take those ones out. You had to have, and even in my office, we had to have one person who did that full time.
Yeah.
It was such a big job.
Yeah.
Right now, 10 years ago, it all went digital.
Yeah.
So I made money, and other people made money by being all over those red books. You could work all night and you'd go and look, let me find a shell that's got nothing in it and cash, and I'll go get it for nothing, and then I'll put something big in it and we'll make money. Well, now what happens is, if you and I thought that was still a good strategy, we just go, give me cash, this size, this number of shareholders, bang, splits out in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So now it's very competitive, but we've found other ways to make money after that.
Yeah, and I'm going forward, that will be the case, right? Just looking for that opportunity, mate. I'm very mindful of your time. We're coming to the close, but I do have one more final question for you. All your experience, all the businesses you've worked in, you would have seen, I would have thought, some themes develop. You mentioned Tassal going to receivership back in the day. What is there a common theme that you see where businesses have not worked or failed? Is there a kind of watch out, I guess, for businesses that fail and ones that have been super successful? Is there a common theme that you see develop?
No, there is no common theme, and there's no common theme for success and there's no common theme for failure. It's, a lot of it is to do with due diligence and making sure you know what you're buying before you even get anywhere near it. And more particularly, the second part, which is how to actually make something out of it. So if you are buying something like a Tassal, then how do I fix it? And how do I know I can fix it? So it's very important not to be romanced by the opportunity. Like if I went down Collins Street or Pitt Street today and you said, I'm going into agriculture, people go, that's a business of the future. But Tassal and Huon are the only two making money. Everybody else is going broke, So what's going wrong? And they don't understand it. People just are romanced by the sexiness of it, And so I think that's it. But then the second thing is you really want to be able to test whether you can make it work or not. So I'll give you an example. I merged Pivot, which is a fertiliser company, a co-op, with Incitec, which is also a fertiliser company, an ag chemical company, and it was 70% owned by Orica. So I was for Pivot. It was about to go broke. The ANZ were about to put it under. So I put to Orica this merger proposal. And they accepted it, so we worked on it. And as we were working on it, I picked out the 5 or 6 key areas where there were really big synergies. So, for example, we both have boats coming at the same time from Nauru with phosphate on it, but different boats. So it took each of these areas and said, okay, give me 2 people from your business, give me 2 people from your business, put them all together, and they worked for 3 months. I said, okay, on day 1, what are we going to do? And we did those numbers, and it was like 100 million of synergies, like 100. It was so big that even though we'd done the work on it and we should have believed our own story, it just, everybody
don't believe it.
It can't be right. It can't be right.
Check the numbers again.
It started day 1, and it's a bit like Trump, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But it started day 1, and we implemented it straight away. And I'm telling you, within the first year, it was like 60 million synergies delivered. Now the company's worth, it was going broke. Now the company's worth 6 or 7 billion, and it's like Tassal, right? Tassal went broke 42.5. I bought it for 42.5. Now I've just advised Cooks to buy it for 1.7 billion. The company that was losing money. And Tassal made profit last year of 165 million.
Wow.
Profit, a business that I bought for 42. So how do you fix that? Well, you better know what the problem is first.
Yeah.
And I did know what the problem is. The problem was that water is coming down from the Gold Coast and places like that too warm. So salmon like growing in 13, 14, 15 degrees. After that, they don't die. They just don't feed. So Coles was saying to Tassal, give us some 5 kilo fish. They look in the nets, they're 1.5 kilos. So they didn't have any cash flow. So the ANZ just put them under like that. I bought it. But it's a timing thing. Talking about before about looking through the cycles. The water comes down again, fish keep growing. I also knew that because of warm water, I needed a different approach. So I put nets over on the west coast of Tasmania and north. And so if these weren't growing that fast, okay, take them out from here or take them somewhere else. And so I knew that business back to front. And as a consequence, look what happened. It's got thousands of employees, makes so much money for the Tasmanian economy. I made a few pennies. So, what do you need?
Interesting. Mate, I could sit here and listen to those stories all day, but I know you're a busy man, so we'll wrap it up there. But thank you very much for your time and your generosity in your stories and your insights. Very much appreciated.